Welcome back to the Micro Advice Podcast. Today, our spotlight is on Navicet, a boutique management consulting firm that focuses on strategy, innovation, performance, and operational excellence. To learn more about what they are doing to empower their clients for delivering a superior customer experience, we are here with managing partner Peter Moon. Peter, it is a pleasure to speak with you today.
Thanks, Jim. You as well.
Thank you. So, Peter, when we last spoke, you piqued my interest on some of the work you're doing with your clients. You struck a chord in that you operate a little differently than a typical services firm. So, with that, can you first briefly describe a little bit on your journey of how you built Navicet?
Navicet does, or we do, I think, in many ways, the same thing I was doing when I was at Microsoft. I was there for 13 years and left in 2014 to start Navicet. And I think part of the reason we did that, my partner and I, was to continue doing the things that we were doing before, but in the hopes of finding customers and organizations and teams that were really enthusiastic about the potential to perform better rather than having to be convinced. So I was hoping that there were going to be some people who would seek us out and say, I think there's some potential for my team to operate better. I'm not sure quite how to diagnose or determine where those opportunities are, but I'm committed and I'm open to having some help. So the real journey, I think, if you're asking about that, has been to try and find our own way along that path, which is a little unusual. I mean, one of the main differences between what we do and a lot of other services companies is that traditionally, I think if you might hire a consultant because you've got extra work, or you've got 5 units of work and you only have 4 units of people, and so you find somebody to hire the work out and deliverable at the end. And our job, as we see it, primarily is to improve how teams work, how teams perform. And that's been just a little bit of a trick to figure out, how do we find our customers, or those kindred spirits that really value the work that we do and that we're going to love working with as well.
That's a very good point. It has to be that mutual back and forth to make it a positive relationship. A lot of what I've been hearing lately and reading about through a variety of different avenues is time to value, whether it be in a product or a service. So is there something you're doing or Navicet is doing to deliver customer value quickly?
That's certainly our mission. I think there's a couple of metrics I think that we keep our eye on. And one is just understanding what the right work is. There's a sort of an instinct, I think, in the corporate world around execution and what's the plan and how do we execute, how do we find bottlenecks, how do we optimize teams process and reduce waste and shorten queue times, all those sort of conventional Six Sigma process excellence tactics. But the big question that we always look for is, are you doing the right thing? What is it that you're actually producing? And one of the tactics that we use is to just view the work through the lens of somebody's experience. So, as opposed to just thinking about cost per transaction or sales volume, we like to ask, is somebody's experience going to be different? And the obvious experience that might be improved is a customer's experience. But there's also all of the people that are working to deliver a great customer experience, and how hard is that for them? Are there a lot of unnecessary rules that get in their way? Do they understand what the big mission of the organization is? What is their instinct for collaboration? Like if you've got a particular task, let's say you work in law and corporate affairs, or if you're in recruiting or you're in supply chain, some sort of corner of your business. You're like, well, here's my job. I know that if I perform my assignment, then, you know, hopefully everything else will work fine. And ultimately a customer who I may or may never get to interact with is going to have a great experience, but I'm not really sure what that is, but I'm just going to execute on my assignments. Um, the, so the tactic that we like to explore is, are there options for moving beyond the assignments, understanding the mission and purpose with enough resolution so that I actually have more latitude in my job to innovate and create interesting solutions or interesting options, to really understand who's taking a dependency on me or my organization, and how can I create better experiences for them, and how can I even create better experiences for my own team so that they're more effective. So I think a lot of it just ends up being or depending on asking the right question through the right lens, and then applying a little bit of room, a little bit of slack to ask, how might we do a better job in this area?
Yeah, that's interesting. And something you had mentioned in there really struck a chord with me. And it's the piece around understanding the bigger picture. So I feel like you have a large organization, and any customer facing practitioner might execute on their piece, but they're not seeing how it fits in to the bigger vision of providing that customer experience. So while the broader company might say we deliver a superior customer value,
Hmm.
it, it's a function of all the small pieces doing the day to day. And if one of those pieces breaks, the whole customer value erodes over time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'd say, you know, that's the immediate implication. But,
Hmm.
you know, if you look at large companies and you see how they operate over a period of time, that happens early in the cycle. You know, somebody messes up a dependency, or you make a big commitment to a big vision, and you say, all right, everybody, here's how we're going to do this. I need architects and LCA staff, and I need, engineers and salespeople and marketing people and supply chain, all to kind of coordinate and come together around this big picture. And what do you do when one group kind of misses out? You know, because they're thinking, well, here's my plan. This is my big 5 goals that I'm going to accomplish this year, and I've got my whole organization to run. And I know that 7 other groups are taking dependency on me. If it doesn't come directly from the boss, maybe I'll sort of try and balance who's going to get that done,
Right.
or who's going to get the benefit of my efforts. And maybe it's 2 out of those 7. So for the other 5, what do? They look at their year, and they're like, well, I guess I don't get a bonus or promotion this year. Next year, I'm going to take a different tack. I'm going to take fewer dependencies on outside teams, and I'm just going to do what I can on my own. And so this is how we begin to get silos, where everybody just says, look, I want to be accountable for my own destiny. I'm going to make sure that I have full control over the metrics that I get evaluated on and the deliverables that I take on as a challenge. And that feels lower risk, but it also means that it's much, much harder to deliver on that big goal. And people ask, well, why aren't we collaborating more? And there's some very subtle dynamics that grow up in these conventional or traditional management environments. And I think people just aren't quite aware of that. These are sort of unintended consequences of some pretty reasonable and intuitive tactics that people take on to try and be more successful. And they make a little bit of progress, but in the end, the damage to the whole organization is surprisingly resilient. It can be hard to repair.
That's an excellent point. And I've seen that many times before, where driving that change to get back on track is a significant lift. Once the organization begins to derail from that focus. So, Peter, whenever you and I spoke last, you had mentioned Navicet focuses a lot on facilitating workshops and trainings. So, one of the biggest points I want to start digging into here is Once you elicit value from the team after one of these workshops or training events, how do you make it actionable? I feel like a lot of organizations struggle with, yeah, after an event, everyone's excited, but then coming up with some sort of actionable plan to make it a reality.
Mm. Boy, that's a giant question, because if you don't change the behavior of an organization, it's all for naught, really. I mean, it's comfortable, and maybe people feel like they sort of know what needs to be done. But bottom line is that any kind of innovation, any design, any new ideas, any new recommitment to a tactic has to result in improved business performance somehow. You've either got to, save money, drive revenue, create better customer experiences, improve loyalty. There's got to be something that improves the health of an organization, than a commercial situation. And even if we're talking about nonprofit or government, they've simply got to deliver on their mission more effectively and more efficiently. So it's a great question. How do you connect intention to practical, pragmatic outcomes? And there's a few steps that I think are important. And the first is you've really got to make sure that when I say operational excellence, and you hear that and go, okay, yeah, got it. I'm on board with that. Do you think about operational excellence in the same way that I do? Are we using the
Right.
same language?
Yeah.
Um,
I think it sounds good, but a lot of people might ponder, "Well, what does that really mean?" Because
that's
you're
right.
right. My version of an excellent operating model or procedure could vastly be different from yours, and even more so than the leadership team.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So here's a bunch of examples of strategies I've seen: people, process, excellence, customer experience, efficiency, cost per transaction, cycle time. I mean, some of those, the later examples, cycle time, for example, that has the advantage of being nominally measurable. I say nominally because even though you say, okay, I know what that means, I think we could measure it, but maybe you don't. And cycle time of what? What's the start point and end point? And what are the factors that control that? Is it seasonal? Are there other conflating factors? How do I know what my contribution to that particular metric is? So the aligning on language is one thing. Second thing is that those big terms of art or code language that often develops inside of an organization, um, it, those need to be translated into some kind of measurable framework so that everybody knows, how are those metrics being developed, how are they published, what is my likely contribution to it, and what new idea that might dawn on me in the middle of the night that I wake up all charged about is actually going to help move that metric in the right direction. Do I have the autonomy and the latitude to be able to invent something and be innovative and introduce that, even if it's not on the quarterly plan of record that we started out with at the beginning? And then the last thing is that I guess, or maybe somewhere right in between there is a tendency for people, in order to come to alignment on an agenda, on a strategy, to sort of water down the original intent or the vibrancy of the vitality of their initial idea, so that they can be kind of bucketed in these larger categories. And unless you have experience in a lot of different organizations who are working on the same agenda as you are, what we've seen is that it can be difficult to diagnose what's really standing in the way. And so what I mean by that is that you can say, well, what we really need is to drive costs down, or we've got to improve collaboration. So let's figure out how we would do that, and what does it mean to collaborate better? But what you're not recognizing, and I'm just going to make up an example off the top of my head here, is that the reason people aren't collaborating is maybe because you've had some failed dependencies before, so people create silos. Or it might be that culturally, if you show up at a meeting and you propose an idea, but you don't have all the details, then you're kind of sort of laughed at or dismissed as, you know, maybe not a serious person, or maybe you're not adding a lot of value if you say you don't know. And on the one hand, people think, well, we're really driving a culture of excellence, and you know, ideas have their own life, and you have to stand up for your ideas because nobody else is going to. And so that makes sense. But the result is that people invest a ton of effort to fully mature an idea before they're willing to share it. But in the end, if it doesn't last or doesn't take off, then that's a ton of effort that you've invested into it before you're willing to share it and recognize, well, maybe you should be investing in something else. So my point is that there might be some cultural dynamic that is interfering with this translation between strategy and execution that is just not visible. It hasn't emerged, it hasn't surfaced enough for people to actually recognize and diagnose it, which can be very difficult to do at all if all you have is the context of your single organization. So having some perspective from across multiple organizations can help you figure out what's actually going on here. What do we need to do? Where do we need to invest in order to get better execution results?
So, Peter, my suspicion and partially experience is whenever consultants leave, they advise, they come up with great recommendations. Oftentimes, they'll even implement some of these actions that are recommended. How do you make that stick? How do you make it sustainable? Because again, my suspicion is a lot of organizations revert back to what they had before as the more natural buoyancy of operations.
Yeah. Um, well, I can speak to what we do anyway. When we go in and work with a client, you know, we did this with a government agency locally in Seattle, and you know, they invited us to talk to them, and they said, "Well, what do you know about what we do?" And we're like, "Not much, nothing." And they're like, "Well, that's not a very convincing sales argument." And like, well, you know, we don't know about coffee. We don't know about chemicals. We know a little bit about software, but, you know, not as much as typically, like if we work for Microsoft, they know much more about their business than we do in marketing. And pretty much anybody that we work with knows more about their business than we do. So we don't come saying, oh, we're going to tell you what to do. We're going to, you know, we've got a secret formula, and then we're going to
Right.
inject that into your organization and show you the light. You know,
Hmm.
that's not how we approach our business. We start and we say, what is already working well here? What are your strengths already? And one question we like to start with is, how do we get more of those things? So we learn a ton about what's going on in our clients' organizations just by talking to them. And they're expert in many, many areas. And so we meet them where they are, and then we try and figure out how do we evolve with them. Um, so that's as opposed to this idea where you come in, I've got the plan, and we try and teach everybody, and you do all the change management and the executive messaging and communications, and you know, you do training, and you know, you measure performance and compliance, and you know, any kind of change where you're trying to say now you have to do this new thing. People are constantly trying to think, well, what about all the old things that I already didn't have enough time to do? Now I got to do two things, and so that transition is very complex, and it's very tough for us to come in and say, you know, the 20 or 30 different roles, how are they actually going to transition? I mean, it's a common model, is to say, let's look at each of the roles, your old job, your new job, and here's how you migrate. But in the end, the best person to lead through that transition is the person doing the work. And so by starting with them and becoming their ally, and sort of rafting up with them, that that helps that transition stick. And I think the other thing, and there's what I started out earlier saying, is kind of a big difference for us, is that if you have extra work, it's not likely that you call Navicet and say, "Oh, can you just do this thing for me?" And then, you know, we take 3 months to do it, or 3 weeks, whatever. And they're like, "There you go, it's all buttoned up. There's your deliverable. Call us
Hmm.
next time you have more work." We typically don't do that. We will do that as a proof of concept to say, watch how we do this. We're going to build this new strategy, or we're going to, build this causal loop, or we're going to refine this process for you, or build this prototype. And then we're hoping that the next time around, you're like, that is a much better way of doing things, which you will have co-designed. And so then it's going to be perfectly aligned with the objectives that you already had, that you already demonstrated that you had. And because you will have had some experience not only with us doing things in some new way, but you will be doing things in a new way too. It's a lot easier to see, how does that connect with the goals that I was trying to achieve? And am I getting the incentives, the rewards, the latitude, the kudos for doing things that are kind of maybe uncomfortable, that I'm not used to doing? And the third thing I want to mention is that most people's instinct to try and bring about change is to create pressure. They want to say, here's a bonus you're going to get. Here's a penalty if you don't do it. And by the way, let me convince you why this is a good thing. And if you're not convinced, let me convince you some more. And so there's a lot of communication, a
Right.
lot of focus on executive communications. And, we like to ask, well, if this is such a great idea, why isn't it happening already? And the punt in that situation is to say, people don't like change. They just want to do things the old way. But think about all the change that people welcome. They sign up for classes, they have families, they sell a house and buy a new house, or they move from city to city. There's all kinds of changes that people waltz right into willingly. So the question we like to ask is, why aren't they doing this already? And can we smooth that pathway? Can we reduce the friction? Because every time you apply pressure, you're creating more friction. And by smoothing the pathway, we're actually taking friction away. And we're saying this is an easier way of doing it. And, it's one thing to wave your hands and imagine if in this new world, and like, I haven't done it. It's hard to imagine. I'm not sure. But if you can sort of walk them through and then they've got some experience, then it's not us that did it and are leaving them with this gold plated, beautiful process that they have to maintain. It's theirs. They did it. They built the process. They plated it with gold, and now they're successful. So as we fade out, um, there's really not that big of a. It's not this like dramatic exit.
Right.
Like it sometimes might be.
They're not dependent on you executing on their behalf.
That's the goal. Some people would say that's a crappy business model, but we like it. It just gives us a
Yeah,
lot of reward.
absolutely. Oh, that's fantastic. Um, One final question, and yeah, pandemic aside, I know there's a lot of focus now on how do companies operate during these difficult times, but
Yeah.
assuming this goes away eventually, from your perspective, what are some of the challenges business may face over the next 5, 7 years? And then any tips that you would have to do now and get ahead of some of those challenges?
A friend of mine said the other day, who is in consulting, he works for some really big CXO at the CXO level with some big organizations, and he said, it used to be when I'd meet with my clients, I'd have to create some sense of urgency and say, something is really big here and you're at risk, or there's a big opportunity and you're going to have to change how you operate in order to capitalize on it. And they're like, we're not sure. We're doing okay. He says, lately, if he starts talking about the need for change, they're just like, up, stop. I don't want to hear it. Look, we're there. I want to know, how do we do it now? And so in some ways, I hate to put it this way because there's so much suffering that's coming about from the pandemic, but at the same time, there's this energy and cold water that people are having to confront to say, if I still want to be in business, I'm going to have to take a look at the external factors to my organization and assess, what does it mean for me? I'm going to have to do something different. So back in February, we as you know management consultancy and facilitators and trainers, we were completely committed to doing things in person. Sometimes people would dial in; they'd always want to. I can't make it. I've got a doctor's appointment. Can I just listen in? And we're like, that's not a great experience. That's not going to work really well. And so, even though there was a few cases where we could make it work, it was never optimal. And
Right.
people have been asking us for years, you should be able to do this remotely. We're like, nah,
Hmm.
it's not possible. So then February, March rolled around, and we're like, well, do we actually want to keep doing this work, or do we want to get a job, some other kind of job? And we're like, no, we want to do this, so we're going to have to figure out a way of doing it. And we buckled down. We started redesigning all our curriculums, all our deliveries. We started exploring a bunch of new technologies. And like a lot of the successful businesses out there, they have, or we have, I think, not sort of put in emergency measures that we expect to be in place until things go back to normal. Like, that's not going to happen. In the 1918 pandemic, we had just come off 10 years of people campaigning against spittoons without success. And then after the 1918 pandemic, 10, 20 years later, there's still no spittoons. Nobody's asking, well, hey, whatever happened? Those spittoons were awesome.
Hmm.
That was a great idea. That doesn't happen anymore. And I think a lot of things are going to just stick around. Like, there's going to be less people working in offices. There's going to be less business travel. People are going to be more casually connected across a greater geography. And I don't know what, pick a business, restaurants, travel, insurance, whatever. I don't know what the impacts are going to be, but I think the thing that's going to allow people to be successful is when they stop sort of waiting for things to go back, when they stop sort of regretting how things are, and just get comfortable and treat kind of conditions as they are as a design constraint, and say, how might we continue to deliver or start delivering even more value than we ever have before, with these new constraints? Because I got to say, for us, it has not been a compromise in how we deliver. There's a few things that we're not able to do as well, like stand together at a whiteboard, face to face, but we can stand together digitally at a whiteboard. And now we don't have to transcribe it. I mean, there's so many advantages. You can get 30 people all with their hand on a marker, all reading and, editing, the same section of a whiteboard without, getting jostled or having to stand back and take turns. So there's so many fantastic advantages, and everybody is being forced to kind of, um, explore these options and see see what kind of promise they hold. So I think in a lot of ways, it's really just a question of mindset and approach, to a new situation. That's true for services companies, and it's true for really anybody that finds himself affected by the current circumstance.
From my perspective, my sense is the one kind of stable point that's going to be there is technology. And there'll be a lot of these new technological tools. And it's just the degree to which you can adopt them, incorporate them across the entire team, utilize them to the most effectiveness. And that's where my passion around customer experience truly comes into play, is because of this onslaught of these tools, having that really good CX and ease of use is going to be crucial. So,
I think the experience is a really important lever. So if
mhm,
you're a SaaS provider and building some software, removing barriers, easing, onboarding, and just making things more intuitive and easier to use and greater utility, features and functions. That's a really important thing. But I think, for companies that are trying to navigate themselves, who are not building SaaS products, the I think it's important just to recognize how much it really is in their own control. And I think fundamentally, as much now as ever, this is a game of culture. It's about how you encourage or reward people for taking moderated risks and just exploring and being able to have an exploratory mindset instead of solely a execution, assignment, command and control mindset that works when the environment is predictable, and it's a lot tougher when you're facing a serious change that you've got to make.
Thank you very much, Peter. There is some gold level advice in here.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. If you want to connect with Peter or myself, I will add our contact information in the box below. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, drop a comment, ask a question, follow us on YouTube, Spotify, or iTunes, and that way you can listen to this again and again and again. Peter, thank you very much. Thank you all, and we'll see you back here, same place, same time next week. Bye now.